Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. If you're loving what you're hearing on the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, go out, tell 2 friends today. Why keep all this goodness to yourself? Spread the love around. On today's show, we're talking about the news. I'm finding in many cases, the news isn't really news. It's not new enough to be news, and it's not old enough to be history. So what is it? It's almost stuck in a no man's land of uncertainty. A lot of people, including investors, rely on the news media to figure out what's going on in the marketplace. There's no doubt there's a lot of good content out there in the news, but there's a few problems with that process. As I've been working on this podcast for about a year now, I've noticed a few things. The major news outlets can't afford to focus on local. The audience is too small. The business side of journalism has changed so much that increasingly news outlets need to focus on a much larger audience. A best example of that is Jeff Bezos' purchase of the Washington Post. He's used his knowledge of the internet to transform the newspaper from a local Washington print publication to a national online publication with over 12,000 pieces of new content a day. But the problem with appealing to a wide audience is you end up quoting national statistics. And as you know, real estate isn't a national business, it's a local business. In fact, it's a hyper-local business. What's happening in Pocatello, Idaho is irrelevant to Chicago or Nashville. These outlets resort to reporting things that are frankly so diluted it adds very little value. A story about interest rates, which affects everybody nationally, is about all they can truly report on that's of broad interest. I've now come to understand why the Wall Street Journal has such a dismal real estate section. But here's the key. When I notice something specific in a local market, I will report it. And while rent control in New York may not apply in Phoenix, Arizona, there are political voices all over the country that agree with what's happening in New York. It's local and specific, but it's also universal, as long as you look at it in the right context. You, the listener, though, have to connect the dots and determine if it applies. In the process of creating content, I have my finger on the pulse of what's going on in the marketplace. It doesn't work for me to simply quote USA Today or the Globe and Mail on the podcast. I wouldn't be adding much value if I did that. I've discovered that I'm seeing real trends by talking to other investors. I'm able to figure out what's happening in the marketplace before it gets reported in the news. This was clearly illustrated to me with 2 episodes in the recent past. On January the 4th, I put out an episode on the impact that student debt is having on delaying home buying for the current generation of university graduates. This week, the Federal Reserve came out with a statement that also reported the same phenomenon. The report by the Federal Reserve was widely covered by all the major news outlets. Here's a second example. In the past month, I reported that one title agency in Silicon Valley had seen a dramatic drop in closings in less than a month. That's a huge shift in transaction volume in a very short time period. While this is only a single data point, it's indicative that there's something going on in the marketplace and we need to pay attention. That single data point caused me to dig a little more, and I found it wasn't an isolated case. On Friday, the Wall Street Journal published a story that homes for sale inventories have risen dramatically in a number of markets across the country. In San Jose, California, for example, for sale inventories increased 131% in a month. Redfin, which analyzes markets across the country, reported that 46 out of 75 metros saw increases in seasonally adjusted inventory. The number of new listings seems to be holding steady. The big change, though, is that buyers seem to have evaporated. The area to see the largest decline in activity was Sacramento, California, where sales dropped 26.5% in the month of December compared with last year. Now, my reaction to the story was, well, of course. I saw that coming a full 4 weeks before it appeared in the news. I saw the student debt issue long before the Federal Reserve report came out. The reason I'm telling you all this is not because I'm doing anything special. I'm just paying attention. If you're a serious investor and you're in the flow of what's going on in the marketplace, you don't need to rely on the news to draw conclusions. You can rely on your own senses. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Victor, you're putting out a daily podcast. That's a lot of work. I don't want to put in all that effort. Yes, I'll accept that producing a daily show is a lot of work. But the work breaks down into a few categories. I do some research for upcoming episodes, but I'm not relying 100% on research. A lot of the content for the show comes from direct observation. That's something that doesn't take extra effort. All it takes is intention and the willingness to pay attention. In fact, you'll see things more clearly and sooner if you trust your own senses. Your eyes and ears will tell you about the market long before CNN or CBS or any of the major news outlets. More important, you'll see with greater clarity than any news outlet can give you. If you're thinking about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.